Apple has just refreshed their lineup of iPads for the year, and combined with the recent launch of the MacBook Neo, the gap between models is even thinner. So much so that it is even more difficult to know which iPad you need. Now, what we do have is effectively 6 different models with 4 different chips and still 3 different pencils. And that's not even every iPad available from apple.com right now. There's also an extra 9 refurbished models, which we'll get to as well. So what are the current iPad models? Now, first there is the 8.3-inch iPad mini with 4 colors, 3 storage options, and it works with either the Apple Pencil Pro or the Apple Pencil USB-C. There's the basic 10.9-inch iPad that comes in 4 more vibrant colors, 3 storage options, and works with either the Apple Pencil USB-C or the first generation Apple Pencil. And then there's the iPad Air, which comes in 2 sizes, 4 colors, 4 storage options, and works with the Apple Pencil Pro and the Apple Pencil USB-C. And then we have the iPad Pro, which comes in 2 finishes, 2 sizes, 2 colors, 4 different storage options, and works with the Apple Pencil Pro and the Apple Pencil USB-C. All of which you can add things like cellular data to, and all of those with their own specific ranges of accessories. Simple. And I wish now I could tell you that it is an easy scale of the entry-level iPad to the highest end iPad Pro and everything in between, but unfortunately not. And yet again, Apple seemingly overcomplicate their lineup when they could so easily simplify it each year when they refresh their lineup, but they don't. What we actually have is different iPads for everything from general use to the niche use cases. And I'm going to explain why, along with how to avoid the dastardly but if trap that is too easy to fall into when buying, any Apple products. So let's start off with the iPad Pro, and I'm going to call this the best iPad for businesses, professionals, and those who, of course, just want the very best. Now, it might actually be a surprise to hear that the iPad Pro is actually the thinnest iPad Apple makes. Thinner, yes, than the iPad Air. Make that make sense. Now, this comes as either a reasonable 11-inch or a pretty mega 13-inch version, and with this year's M5 chip. And you can also choose 4 different storage options here, which will actually impact how powerful the iPad is. So let me just explain that. So if you pick the 256 gig or 512 gigabyte models, you will get 12 gigabytes of memory and a 9-core CPU. But if you pick a 1 or 2 terabyte storage options, you will actually get 16 gigabytes of memory and an extra performance CPU core. But that's not all. The 1 and 2 terabyte options are the only choice if you want the nano texture glass, which does an excellent job at reducing reflections and glare from really bright light sources, windows, sun, all that kind of thing, whilst doing a good job at maintaining color accuracy and screen quality. But the next question is whether you actually need any of these. I can't think of many workloads that couldn't be done on the iPad Air. There's only really a couple of reasons why you might need an iPad Pro over the iPad Air. Now, number one, that massive 13-inch display really makes this thing feel more like a laptop than a tablet. Maybe you don't need to travel with your iPad much, or maybe you work solely on the iPads. This could make all the difference for you. Or maybe if you're doing graphics design work, I know the larger 13-inch model is a firm favorite for many artists and those into CAD design and such. Number 2, the 2 terabyte storage capacity. There's not many workloads which really require that much storage locally, like on device, unless maybe you're doing video editing. And then 3, Thunderbolt and USB 4. Now, the iPad Pro is the only iPad with these faster transfer speeds. So maybe if you are a video editor transferring large files, maybe you want to hook this up into a Thunderbolt display, then this feature will definitely be something that you will want. And number 4, that nano texture display, of course, which if you are working in brightly lit studios or maybe outdoors, could be extremely helpful. And the nano texture option is still a $100 upgrade, but that does include Apple's $19 polishing cloth right in the box. Now, although the iPad Pro is the only iPad to support this nano texture display, there might be an even better option if you want to have this matte display whilst also still really enjoying the pencil experience, and that's Paperlike, who is a regular favorite for our viewers on this channel and who kindly agreed to sponsor this video. Rather than it being etched directly into the glass like the nano texture display and available on only the more expensive iPad Pros, the Paperlike 3 is a screen protector that also doubles up by making that glassy, smooth screen feel way more like paper. So when using any Apple Pencil on any iPad, it will feel a lot more like, drawing or writing on actual paper. And actually, it sounds similar too. Now, this isn't the same as Apple's nanotexture coating. It actually uses Paperlike's patented nanodot technology to make it what it is. But for note takers and artists, Paperlike is the only way to make your iPad feel more enjoyable to use. It's also affordable and available across all sizes and all iPads. There are 2 included in every purchase, and with their new Butterfly application, they are super simple to install. And if you just don't get on with it for any reason, there's always a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So if you don't like it, or if you somehow mess up fitting both of the included screen protectors in each pack, you can simply get a free replacement or a complete refund. So give it a try, grab one using the link down below this video. And if you have used one before, why not just comment down below with your own experience to see what other people think as well. Now let's have a closer look at the display on the iPad Pro. Now this is the only model to feature a tandem OLED panel, giving you much truer blacks, much higher contrast than the other iPad models. And the tandem OLED tech actually stacks 2 OLED panels on top of each other to make each pixel even brighter and achieve higher color accuracy. And when it comes to the Apple Pencil support on the iPad Pros, you can either use the Apple Pencil USB-C or use the Apple Pencil Pro. And for most people, if you're buying the iPad Pro and trying to decide which pencil to go for, then really the Apple Pencil Pro is the only option to go for here. This one magnetically attaches to the side of the iPad, it charges wirelessly, has Find My support built in for when you inevitably lose the pencil, and the Apple Pencil Pro has some additional sensors you might not even think about, such as squeeze and roll, along with haptic feedback. And it is just features like this that make using an Apple Pencil Pro feel more like a real pencil. Now in comparison, the USB-C pencil charges via USB-C, so just don't forget to plug it in from time to time, and it lacks any of the advanced features. The USB-C pencil support on the iPad Pro is really just that, it's just support. If you already own one, or maybe you want to save a bit of money because you don't plan on using one heavily, then it is supported. And then onto that USB-C port on the iPad, which, as mentioned, is actually a Thunderbolt or USB 4 port. So you can hook up Thunderbolt accessories, storage docks, hubs, those kind of things, which honestly can then turn your iPad into a center of, a full powerhouse workhorse setup. Now the iPad Pro is the very ultimate iPad in terms of capability, compatibility, and design, but that does come at a price, a very expensive price. Now this starts at $999 for the 11-inch and $1,299 for the 13-inch. But then I think if you need this iPad, you're actually going to be looking for the 1 or 2 terabyte storage option for, the faster chip, the nanotexture display, which makes the starting price $1,599 for the 11-inch or $1,899 for the 13-inch. And I think if just anything I've said is an absolute must on your list, tandem OLED, thinnest product ever, Thunderbolts, then by all means, buy an iPad Pro. But again, this year, I think the iPad Air is actually the better overall buy, so let's talk about why that might be. Now, with most configurations, the iPad Air is around half the price of the iPad Pro. The iPad Air starts at $599 for the 11-inch and then $799 for the 13-inch model, but not the same 11 inches as the iPad Pro. It's actually more like 10.89 inches on the iPad Air. And it makes some of those savings by removing some of the more niche use cases that the iPad Pro is catering for. So let's see what the iPad Air trims from the iPad Pro to get to that price. Now you lose the OLED Ultra Retina XDR display from the iPad Pro. Instead, you get an IPS display with LED backlight that's not as bright as the Pro. It's 500 nits versus 1000 max nits on the Pro. You lose 120 Hz ProMotion, which is replaced with a 60 Hz refresh rate. There is no nano texture coating here on the higher storage models, although again, you can just slap a Paperlike on there if you wanted to. And you're getting an M4 chip instead of Apple's very latest M5 chip. Thunderbolt via USB-C is replaced with just regular USB-C port, which in file transfer terms is basically half the speeds. The Face ID option gets swapped for Touch ID here. Now there are still 4 storage options, but they are basically half. So starting from 128 up to 1 terabyte instead of 256 up to 2 terabytes. You get half as many speakers, half as many mics, and you can't shoot portrait photos on the Air. If you're doing that, I'm not sure who shoots photos on the iPad? Let me know down below. And it doesn't have a LiDAR scanner, so again, a very niche use case here. Maybe you're scanning objects or measuring rooms. You won't be able to get that precise LiDAR measurements. You'll have to get an iPad Pro or an iPhone Pro for those. Now, honestly, out of all of those features, the only one I might really get picky about is the 120Hz ProMotion and Face ID. Other than that, it does sound like a big downgrade, but the display is still actually incredible. Performance is wild. You're getting a computer class processor in a slate of glass, just not the very latest. And let's be honest, who is out there taking photos with their iPads? Like, again, please leave a comment. I just need to know and understand who you are. And it still works with both the very best Pencil Pro and the more affordable Apple Pencil USB-C. So the question, I guess, is, are these a valid reason to upgrade to the iPad Pro? Now, for most people, and certainly for me, arguably not. So I think for most people, the iPad Air is the best option to buy. It is like the entry-level Pro, similar in design to last year's chip. And no matter whether it's watching videos, replying to emails, or even more advanced stuff like video and photo editing, it really is a fantastically powerful and very capable iPad at roughly half the cost of the iPad Pro. And it's the same story since the very first M series chip in the iPads. The software, the iPad OS, is still to make full use of all of that power anyway. So now onto the original, the iPad, just iPads. Now this one comes in just one size and still uses the same dodgy ruler that the iPad Air does, 11 inches or 10.89 if you're being specific. And last year, Apple brought the base price down to make it more justifiable in the lineup. And again, if you're a student, don't forget you can actually get more of a discount when using student discounts here. And this is probably the best choice for just a general purpose kind of buyer, like a child or a couch web browser. But this iPad is the iPad that's kind of could, with various caveats. Now the screen is great. The A16 chip is the same chip from the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 15, minus a core. It's a very reasonable, but a little bit dated now. Still plenty fast enough though for most people. I just wouldn't be trying to do any complex video or photo editing on this, but for the occasional family video, sure, why not? And you do have 3 storage options here, 128, 256, and 512 gigabytes. And when you compare it to the iPad Air, you can see they only really made some compromises. Now, obviously, you're not getting the mega powerful M4 or M5 chips. The screen is not as good as the P3 wide color screen on the Air and just lacks any, anti-reflective coating, so outdoors visibility, of course, may vary. It has the last gen Wi-Fi 6, which nobody I know, well, except me, has actually upgraded to Wi-Fi 7 yet. Anyway, and then on paper, it doesn't have Apple Intelligence support, but to be honest, Apple are still far behind on Apple Intelligence anyway and isn't really useful in any way. And it doesn't support the Apple Pencil Pro, so you're limited to the more basic USB-C pencil, or if you want to buy a Lightning, yes, Lightning, to USB-C adapter, this is 2026 and we're still talking about Lightning, you can use a first gen Apple Pencil, which does actually do a little bit more than the USB-C pencil, which is newer, but might be then harder to come by. Honestly, just make this whole pencil thing make sense. Otherwise, it's basically a more affordable iPad Air with, well, just cheaper components. Now, this starts at $329, and this is actually a completely different league to the $599 starting point of the iPad Air. It puts it just more in place of someone who wants to use an iPad for occasional casual use. It's not trying to be a replacement for your laptop, even though for some uses it could be. And we're going to talk about the MacBook Neo in just a moment. And it is definitely a near perfect device for most people that I believe it's targeting, like students, kids, or just for adults who don't need this, laptop grade iPad. Whilst I still believe that if you want to pick an iPad for, the more professional use cases, then that iPad Air does still make the most sense. Now, if, like most people, you're buying it as you don't really use a computer at home or just want something bigger than an iPhone for some tasks, then the iPad is the very compelling option here. Now, if you do want something that is more like a laptop, maybe if you are a student and need something to, research or do homework on, then the brand new MacBook Neo actually works out cheaper than the iPad with the Folio keyboard, and might actually be a better purchase, especially with the student pricing, which comes out at $499 for the base model, which is a pretty stunning deal as far as value to performance this year, especially with memory and storage prices surging for Windows devices. Otherwise, the iPad is perfect for general use, content consumption, reading, writing emails, web browsing, social media, all that kind of good stuff. Now, the last product in the lineup, the iPad Mini, which, as I've said before, is my favorite iPad ever made. Pending the iPhone Fold, perhaps. Time will tell. Now you might think we compare it to like the base, like iPad, regular, just iPad. But it's actually in its own kind of little space here. It has an A17 Pro chip, so not an M series, but the same as we saw in the iPhone 15 Pro. It works with the Apple Pencil Pro and supports the USB-C pencil like an Air or a Pro. It does have the same 3 storage options as the base iPad, and it is just unashamedly not a laptop. Apple doesn't even sell an official keyboard for this iPad because they know it's not supposed to be a computer. Now this iPad is simply just the perfect travel companion. Read books, listen to music, watch your favorite movies and TV shows. It is just so small and compact, which means you can then, throw it into a bag, bring it on a flight with you. And in some cases, it can even fit into your pockets. I just love bringing my iPad mini with me when traveling, particularly on flights because I get to bring my own, entertainment with me. I can wear comfortable noise-cancelling headphones instead of those crappy airplane ones, and I get to block out everything around me. And then I'm not using all of my phone's battery on, however long a flight I've got with them fumbling around with charging cables and hoping that the USB charger in my seat is going to charge and it's going to work and be fast enough. Now, you are not buying the iPad mini because it's a powerhouse of an iPad that you can do professional things on. And you're not buying it because it's the cheapest because, well, it's not. It starts at $499. So closer or much closer to an iPad Air in price. And actually this price, that's the price of a whole MacBook Neo at student discount, which again is absolutely crazy thinking that Apple is the king of value right now. You're buying one because it is the mini one, and the mini one works in just so many places. It's convenient, it's an add-on to what you're already carrying. They're also really popular in aviation too for pilots to review flight documents and those things. Just the size, having it on their lap is so convenient. But the iPad mini for me is just, like I've said, the perfect companion until we get maybe a foldable iPhone that could get very close to having, the iPad mini experience when unfolded. But again, time will tell on that. So in terms of sizes, whether it is the 11-inch versus 13-inch or the 8.3-inch iPad mini, it just totally depends on your use case. Now, I own all of the iPad models because of making these videos, right up to the 12.9-inch Pro, which I never, ever use. It's just the size of my laptop. And by the time I then added a keyboard, it just costs so much more than my laptop, which just makes zero sense to me. So my advice is, if the iPad is going to be your main device that you want to use every day and use it as if you were using a laptop, with a keyboard, but you don't want to buy a MacBook, then by all means, go for the bigger 13-inch models. Otherwise, if you want to use it as an iPad, go for one of the smaller models. Now, there are some other considerations you need to make once you've opted for which specific model you want. Now, I've always tended to buy the base level storage because I'm downloading my apps, maybe a few movies or books and some music. I'm using iCloud or Google Cloud to store, most of my full resolution photos. And generally, now the lineup starts from 128 gigabytes. That just works really well for me. Even if you are downloading a bunch of movies to watch when traveling, it is still plenty of storage for most people. However, if you are doing more than that, especially if you're having, a serious attempt at using the iPad to replace a laptop, then of course, go bigger for your storage. And then next up is Cellular. Now, if you want to plan on taking your iPad outside, away from your home or your office, then I would still consider Cellular. Now, you can tether your iPad to your iPhone, but it's not as seamless as Apple would make you think. You'll often be, trying to position your phone in a way to get the best signal, and nothing seems to be as fast as it would as if you had Cellular built in. I've also had issues tethering when abroad, so there's that as well. Now, you'll also gain GPS when you add Cellular. I don't often pull up maps on my iPad, but it always feels very strange when you open up maps and it doesn't know your exact location. Again, for pilots, you will want that GPS option, so you will want to opt for Cellular. And so if you do want to add Cellular, you can obviously get a data plan at any point in time, or even a temporary eSIM, and then your resale value will be ever so slightly better. Not as much back as you would from high storage options, but again, it's something. And then, as I alluded to at the beginning, Apple sells several previous generations iPads on their website still, via the certified refurbished link at the bottom of their websites. And now there are some deals to be had here, normally up to 15%. And in my experience, you would never actually know these were refurbished. They arrive practically brand new in anything other than perhaps the box. Sometimes they come in like a refurbished box. But because the models change so frequently, I'm going to link down to my previous iPad buying guide in the video description. And this should help you make an informed decision about if an older iPad model is right for you based on the features available at that time of the video. And as I've said already, the iPad OS software still has quite a lot of catching up to do to get the full performance out of the latest chips. So maybe opting for an iPad with an older chip in isn't actually the sacrifice it may initially sound like. There are also deals to be had on places like Amazon a lot of the time, so it's just well worth checking these for any discounts. But do just be aware of buying any used products from Amazon, like Marketplace or Warehouse. Always make sure they are new and from a reputable seller. And then one of the biggest challenges we have with the whole Apple thing is the whole but if thing. So let's start with the base iPad. But if I buy the basic iPad, I need to upgrade to 256 gigabytes of storage. And then it's only a little bit more for the mini, and that's faster as well. But if I do that, then I could get the Air, as it's faster and bigger, but I still need the 256 gigabyte model, so I need to upgrade to that too. And I still need a case, so let's add that on again. But if I do that, it's basically the same price as an iPad Pro, so I may as well buy that. And all of a sudden, you've gone from spending like $350 to almost $1,000 in only a few silly choices. So all I will say here is decide on your like must-haves in terms of your specs and features and stick with that. Like, don't trick yourself into going up that Apple pricing money tree as far as you possibly can. So stick with those specs that you need. Another decision, and one you should consider for any Apple product, is whether to buy AppleCare. Now this is Apple's accidental damage protection and can even get you a brand new iPad next day should the worst happen. Now for iPad, it normally covers all of your Apple accessories too, so things like pencils, keyboard, and from personal experience, compared to AppleCare for say a desktop Mac or even a MacBook, you are more likely to need this for an iPad. My iPad Pro has a big old crack in the screen somehow, and my daughter uses my iPad Air a lot of the time now. Both use cases where having AppleCare would be, or rather would have been, much worthwhile. You can also pay monthly for AppleCare, so if you are not too sure whether you want to do this or not, maybe go for the monthly payments and then decide later down the road if you are actually careful enough not to need it. You do need to decide at the time of purchase though, so once you've opted for monthly, you can't then swap for yearly. But otherwise, let me know in the comments down below, which iPad did you decide to buy, along with any questions of course, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.